The docket did not smell of dust. It smelled of iron kettles and old lye, of raw river damp pressed into paper until the fibers remembered it the way a scar remembers heat. I pulled it from the Franklin County crate without expecting more than another coroner's polite falsehood, and found instead a heading that made the back of my neck go cold in the precise place my barber had nicked last week. Einkuestinto oni kai LDT by CE repar to blow. In a clerk's fast hand that can only be taught by heat and mosquitoes, the date August 1834. The clerk, one of my tribal elders, had underlined nothing. He had been too busy trying to keep his ink from sweating off the page. If you have never come across a page that makes you sit down before you have read to the bottom, then I wish you in charity to know that shock. I was not sentimental. I was a deputy at the courthouse with a thin practice in wills, a decent marriage, and a barn whose south wall had learned all the names of wind. I put the docket on the table so it did not have to bear my lap and read. On this day came Dr. Elias D. Boone, Sorn, and one Mr. Silas Sutterfield and his wife Mary, likewise Sorn, and did present the body of an infant, and afterward the living body of an infant, both answering to the name Harlan Sutterfield, the former buried, the latter not. There is no way to write that without inviting ridicule. I am writing it anyway, because the county did. The doctor's report looked more like a sermon than a science. A pair born to Mary Sutterfield on the 17th instant, the first still and the second alive. The mother the sort of small woman who puts a house on her frame without complaining about the weight, an absurdity that makes physicians inclined to tenderness and to lying. The husband a river man with the hands that rivers make. The still boy laid in swaddling, baptized with hope, put in a cedar drawer with a blanket to keep him from the shock of the dirt. The living boy breathing, rooting, moving one side more than the other. We have the custom here, Mary said later in the transcript, to cover the glass when a person dies, lest he see himself and not know which side to go. I covered the looking glass with my apron. I hung a spoon by a string. I put the little one, the dead one, in the drawer with a penny. I set the drawer on the chair. I told my sister to put a new broom across the threshold so that death would stumble on it and not come back into my kitchen. Don't write this as superstition. It is habit. Habit is the only thing a woman can afford. She did not say the other thing that habit made her do, turn the shoes under the bed upside down so paws could not follow breath. The clerk did not write it either. I know it because my mother did the same when neighbor children died, and she had to wash their small shirts without screaming into them. By midnight, Dr. Boone wrote, not bothering to hide that he had been too proud to sleep. The living twin ceased when he tried to begin. His right hand, which had clutched like a slow bird earlier in the day, lay open. His left, the lazy one, now did the work and strained against the swaddling. He took breath as if someone else were timing him. The window collected a little crescent of water where there had been none. The barometer that sat on my shelf, a gentleman's foolishness in country work, dropped half a line. The spoon on its string tapped the upright twice, plain as a circuit, writer's sarcasm, and then once, as if to say what my training would not let me say. Something had come in like a person who knows the house. If you wish to leave the tale at Portance and be done, you are no worse than the editor at the Gazette, who would later reject my ancestor's letter with a flourish of red pencil and the kindness we save for people who mix grief with heat. But the docket did not leave it there. It did not mean to be read by anyone who wanted to go on believing that Kentucky in 1834 was entirely whiskey and flax and tobacco and law. It meant to be read by a county that had already put, in a little box in its brain, the fevered deaths of that summer, the river's reluctance to behave, the way children fall in late heat, the way moths fall in winter, not because they are weak, but because something takes them while it takes the air. Mary Sutterfield's sister Hannah. The clerk wrote in a hand that had learned to push faster when grief began to talk, declares that after the prayer the minister said for the dead, he being the sort of man who believes that God keeps correct ledgers, the drawer that held the dead infant made a sound like someone turning over slowly in a narrow bed. She says no one wants to open a thing one has already given to the dirt. She says she put her hand on top of the drawer and said, hush. The sheriff asked whether she believed the boy was alive. I believed the drawer knew both sides of the house, and I told it not to get greedy. Hannah said, "And if that sounds like witchcraft to you, go live a year with a loom and a husband and 3 babies buried before harvest and tell me afterwards what kind of talk saves your mind." By morning, the living twin was not dead. He was not quite alive either. He lay, the doctor wrote, as if someone had put him on a shelf for later. His pulse was the sort women make when they sue and talk at the same time. He took milk from his mother's breast and let it dribble out the left side of his mouth, and the right side, pious, stubborn, held what it could. He moved not as a boy moves, but as a rope moves when the other end is not in your hand. You would say, the doctor wrote, without knowing how to be ashamed of the poetry of it, that he was learning to live twice. The county loves its ledgers, and if a case does not take a routine shape, the clerk tries to find one for it. The docket included a line that would have made me laugh if I had not been 20 years too old for that. Baptism repeated. Dr. Boone insisted on a second christening for the boy that lived, not because he believed that the first had been wasted, but because he believed that names are a kind of medicine, and that if you give a name to a child twice, he will be too burdened by the repetition to slip away. There is a practicality to the superstitions of this place. He scribbled to a friend in Lexington later, a letter that only remained because his correspondent folded it wrong, and it fell out of a Bible when his cousin took it for a book of receipts. You do not tell people not to cover their looking glass. You do not pretend to scorn the penny in the drawer. You note that sometimes a spoon taps twice and then once and does no harm. You teach yourself to count with it. You offer no explanation except to say that the river takes and gives on no man's schedule, and that a child is a kind of river. The mystery loves practical people. It strolled into the Sutterfield kitchen in the days after the burial like a neighbor with a dish and a complaint, and set itself down in the space between the chair and the hearth and refused to move. Twice in the morning, at no hour Mary could predict, the spoon on the string would tap the chair leg, sound like something at a distance happening in a second room, and then in the afternoon, when the sun made its white argument with the stove once. It was not a house rat, Mary knew rats. It was not the wind, Hannah's husband knew wind. It was not gossip. The Sutterfields were not famous for anything but stubbornness and a cedar drawer with a new penny in it, and a grave under the oak where the ground never learned to be as flat as it had pretended. On the third day, when the doctor took the boy onto his table and set to measuring him with the ridiculous gentility he had taught himself in Philadelphia. Weight this hour. 1 ounce more than weight yesterday at this hour. Pulse at left wrist 20 points more than pulse at right. Something else happened that made the county leave the business of naming the living and come to look into my docket 30 years later with the shyness of men who have told their sons to stop being afraid of their wives. The dirt at the edge of the new grave the dead twin's grave had settled as graves do when a family learns its weight in dirt, and then an animal. Anybody in the county would have said, animal, if you had asked before they saw, had put a paw into the place where the dirt had not yet learned to approve of itself. There were marks. You can put your finger into dry clay and make a mark that dries with your finger's arrogance. This was not that. The marks were wet, and we had not had rain. They looked almost like the near side foot of a man's boot, but the heels never showed, and there were 2, next to each other, left and right, as if someone had set both hands flat to the dirt to get up, and then changed their mind and stayed. The Sutterfield women, desperate in the way that makes women look like witches to men who haven't learned the smell of laundry boiled in lye, turned their door over to their neighbors and went to the doctors with their hands over their mouths. You do not bring a grave to a physician if you can help it. The physician, to his credit, did not tell them to go to the parson instead. He folded up his foolish barometer under his arm and took his bag and went with them to the oak. He put his hand on the dirt and lifted it with his palm down. He sniffed like a man who wishes he smoked. He said nothing. The sheriff said, because sheriffs must say something, "A coon." "Do not insult what you refuse to name by calling it a coon," said Hannah, whose mouth had learned too much discipline to be asked not to laugh at men. The grave was not disturbed. It did not sink or harrow. It did not become a story for other counties to smirk at when they came through in wagons on their way senselessly to Louisville. It was a grave. On the 5th day the dirt had a tendency to be damp where the day should have seen it dry, and on the 6th day a jackdaw. Yes, we had them too. We did not find them less ridiculous because we find their English cousins ridiculous. Left a bread crumb on the stone. It does no good to say that the spoon tapped twice and then once that week at irregular hours, and that the child's pulse could be made to take certain numbers. If one stood him near the cedar drawer and the penny, men do not like to be told they can be made into instruments. They prefer to say that children are instruments and leave themselves out of it. Dr. Boone wrote a letter to a man at Transylvania University, our poor proud name for a small brave place in Lexington, and made philosophical talk about nerves. This satisfied the kind of men who like to be pleased by the word nerves. Mary did not ask for Transylvania. She asked for the things women ask for when a storm goes around your house and you want it to remember to keep going, for people to offer to sit an hour so a woman can sleep for 2, for a family to teach the door how to stand, for grits to do what they do when a stomach is made of prayer and something else. Did the living boy, Harlan, always Harlan, they did not try to rename him and make him dizzy. Bear marks that a coroner cannot write without becoming a clown. He did not. He did not wake with dirt in his hand, nor sap, nor any other moral. He woke twice in the night, stiff as a man on a pallet after harvest, and went limp at the touch of his mother's palm. An old woman in the lane said, "Turn his shoes," and Mary, who would have done anything, turned them. Someone else said, "Put your broom across the threshold," and she put it there, not because she believed it would stop death, but because the broom needed being put somewhere, and a threshold is a good enough place for that. A man who had been to a meeting in Versailles and decided to acquire a science said, "Magnetism," in the way people say rope. When they have made trouble for a house, the magnetism did not answer, the spoon did. Twice, then once, at the city that calls itself my own in 1868, a wise man with a long nose and disgraceful hands wrote a piece in a medical journal about mirror twins, who, he observed, may present injuries on opposite sides because the embryo splits late. He had examples from Bavaria because Germans write down their strange. He made use of words that would break on a Kentucky table in the presence of lion prayer. He would have dismissed my docket because it did not say mirror in the right place. If he had wanted to learn a thing his German did not contain, he might have come to the Warfield place on the South Elkhorn, where a boy put his hand, his mother said, with 2 fingers separated from the others, and lay like that for an hour while her other boy, dead, lay like that in a drawer with a penny. No doctor of his kind would have come. We had our own doctor. He did not explain, he counted. It was August. The river smelled like a horse under a saddle. The cholera had been and gone, and had said, "I will collect the rest later." The graves under the oak were shaded so perfectly that a man could consider belief without anyone accusing him of being lazy. On the 9th day, the living boy went limp at dusk and remained so until the spoon touched the chair leg twice, and then his eyes, that had been unfocused because babies' eyes are in on a joke adults do not get, came to attention. It is not a thing a coroner can write without making himself a laughingstock. I am not a coroner. I am a clerk with a family and a barn and a burned place on my wrist where a rope taught me that sideways is a direction and not an excuse. I am writing it because the docket told me to, and because I sat my own chair and listened in my own kitchen. Not then, later. And heard 2 and 1 and understood that the world does not ask you to be worshipful to keep its bargain with you. It asks you to be punctual. If you want your hook, if you require that the story shove you into the next page with your breath held like a boy at a well, take this on the 10th night. The drawer with the dead boy, the penny still in it because poverty insists on theft, and the town pastor had told Silas to leave the penny as a promise to God to be better at money. Moved, not drag, moved. 2 inches. The varnish made that noise old furniture makes when it remembers the humidity it was born to, and the spoon said twice, and then 1, and Mary, who had been asleep with her hand over the child's ribs like a good lid, woke and, without screaming, like a creature that has learned to be part of her kingdom, said, All right then. She took the penny from the drawer. She set a heel of bread on the sill. She put salt across the threshold. Not a line, not a mountain, just the pinch that says, I am here and I know my attention has been requested. The doctor, the man of Transylvania, the sheriff, all of us were none of us present. It was not an event, it was a ritual. It is why I entered it in the docket with the numbers, not the cursed words. The spoon tapped. Twice the living boy breathed. The dead boy did not. The house took its breath. The ledger took mine. Continued in Peggy 2, Peggy 2, science does not fail honestly, it fails noisily, like a porch that collapses under a family's weight in winter, because a man decided to trust his head more than the grain in the post. I do not mean by this to insult Dr. Boone. He did not fail. He persisted. He did what men with barometers and sympathy do when confronted with a thing that will not yield to the language they bought in Philadelphia. He measured, he wrote. He wrapped his data around his good sense like a quilt. He visited at odd hours. He asked Hannah, because women will answer when asked properly, to do exactly what made her teeth ache, not to sweep on days when the spoon tapped of its own, to leave the broom across the threshold, to set a heel of bread on the sill when the night was breathy. He was not the only man to insist on a word for the thing that the spoon was trying to teach us. In September, a man from Lexington with that expression polite men get when they are tired of being polite and want a story they can perform arrived with a small coil and a glass tube and a vocabulary of Galvanism. He had a letter from Transylvania University that was not written in the sort of hand one brings to a kitchen. He called what he brought a battery. He touched the battery to the boy's little wrist. The boy did not oblige him by becoming a religious pamphlet. He touched it to the spoon. The spoon did not oblige him by resisting its own habit to become a galvanic instrument. He touched it to the cedar drawer because there is in any man with a small instrument and a table a temptation to do harm to what is small. The cedar drawer made the little noise it had learned to make when humidity and grief meet. Twice, then one. The battery was not invited back, in on its way to a bowel. I am in favor of washing hands after rope. But I do not find that we did our best when we allowed men who had not learned the names of our fields to come into a kitchen and ask a spoon to forget its correct grammar. Dr. Boone was better than that. He went to the cedar drawer and put his hand on it, not to own it, not to signal to it that he was a man of letters, but because an old woman looked at him and said, "Do that. It is the decent thing." He did. He noted humidity increased. Hand felt damp, because he had a barometer and a vocabulary, and he put them both to the use of boring God. There were experiments he did not write, because men with barometers often have wives, and those wives tell them what is polite to write and what is not. On the 12th day, Mary woke with her hair stuck to her temple, and the boy, whose hair had not learned to be hair, with his crown a little damp. She did not say this to the doctor, because men with barometers and diplomas sometimes call the hair of women unsanitary and call the damp heads of babies fever. She told Hannah, and Hannah told her to put a little salt at the hearth and turn the shoes again and go about her work. And I tell you this now because there will come a time when you will expect your own hair to behave like science, when it is needed to behave like felt and memory. And if you do not put salt on your own threshold, it will not occur to you to be saved by anything other than a spoon. September came, not with the godlike thunder our county likes to pretend is ours when we talk to people from the north, but with low beasts of cloud and the kind of evening that makes a woman cut her work in half because she knows that tomorrow will come in hotter than anyone wants to admit. The graves under the oak stayed respectable. The penny had been taken from the drawer, because a sermon had instructed it so, and because Mary wanted her child's drawer not to be a bank. The bread on the sill was habit. The spoon hung on its string, not because anyone loved spoons, but because a spoon is what you have that does not offend anyone. The baby, Harlan, learned to take his mother's breast with his whole mouth again and to keep milk in his right cheek. He learned to lick his lip when it was not needed. He learned to make a sound that was not a cry, but that pretended one. Around the same time, the county learned that men were being put in beds in Versailles and Lexington and died without names because the plague, cholera, did not care for letters, And because places where men with barometers teach other men with barometers do not have as many Hannahs who will put their hand on a drawer until it is made respectable. There was the matter of the cave. You cannot be from here and not have a corner of your thinking occupied by caves. They go everywhere. They undermine every sentence. They give a man the opportunity to call himself guide, and to bring a candle where a candle was not needed, and to bind his manhood to a hole. If you make of that obscenity what city men make of any plain thing, you will think I am saying something worse than I am. I am not. I am telling you that the ground here is not a floor. It is a sieve. Eaves swallow dogs full. Cedars have cave under their roots. The ravine behind the Sutterfield place fed into a split in the rock with saltpeter dust on its lips. A boy with a bottle could have crawled in and told his friends later that he had been part of something. Word reached the kitchen that a cry had come from the hole the morning of the 14th day. The neighbor boy, the one with the calfskin cap, said he had been stooping for water and heard it in the way the bones of his head make some noises, leave traces where others simply pass. He did not need to make his young horror sound like a sermon. He simply said cry. Men like me made it worse when we used the words, the other one. The sheriff debated rope at the mouth of the cave with all the sense of a man who has been told he has a sheriff's duty and told he is not to make an event of someone else's business. A rope is a sermon. Men who like sermons like rope. They like to feel the fiber talk to their hand like a living thing that one can have a reckoning with and take into account in one's fees. They lowered a line because when a hole yells into your county must answer and not be made ridiculous. It went down a few feet and then scraped along. You know the sound. Rope does not lie about sideways. It complains. It spoke to our hands like a half-broken animal that had been used to making a living pulling and was now being asked to translate. Hannah said, under her breath, "Don't you dare call him by his name." Her mouth had learned the correct liturgy. The boy did not come up by rope. Nobody does. Children do not respond to rope. Children respond to bread and to their mother's hand on a drawer. They respond to a spoon and to salt and to lie steaming on the stove. They do not respond to a battery. They accept a loaf. They refuse a knot. The men came away from the cave with their shame in their coats. They took the rope and coiled it as if the coil were to be believed by anyone with a kitchen. On the 15th day, the doctor did his brave and wrong thing. He took the child to his table and set about balancing him on the scale because it felt like work and because numbers are polite. He put a mirror near the table because he had read in a book that two things one cannot understand yield more easily when you are impudent with reflective surface. It is a small practice of our tribe, imported. We cover our glass. They put glass in front of what suffers. He put the mirror there not because he thought it would fix the problem, but because it would not admit his humility. The boy looked at his reflection and did the one thing a child can do in the face of two. He fell asleep. The spoon tapped twice, then once. The barometer acknowledged one of its little tragedies. The creek under the ground made the noise a creek makes when it would like to be allowed to see the light. The doctor wrote, to his credit, "There is a phenomenon. There is a child. I do not mind stating both." The pastor did not like any of it. He did his job, which is to look at a family whose floor has turned into sieve and tell them that he has seen it before, and it does not make God smaller. Actually, no such thing can. And to bring a pocket full of verses. He told them to put a penny where it belonged now, on the mouth of their jar, to keep their jar from being weak, and to keep his name out of any story told later by people who wanted to put religion on the same table as barometers. He put his hand. This is in the docket not because the coroner believed in holy touch, but because the coroner had a family, on the cedar drawer and said, "Peace. Peace is what you ask for when you are too proud to say, 'Let go.' Peace is what a porch looks like when it is not yet collapsed but is about to be. Peace is what a man says when he cannot admit that a spoon has proved more useful than his library. Peace is what a woman says when she moves the broom to get a stranger into her house without being shamed of needing to move it, and also wanting him to know she knows what she is doing. Peace is what Hannah said when the rope came back with saltpeter dust on it, and someone put their hand to the dust and tried to make a cross as if to show that making a sign is a way of counting. The thing you want me to tell you is whether the boy dead came back. He did not. The drawer slept. The penny went to the jar. The dirt under the oak accepted its water the way we accept asking unanswerable questions as a hobby and not a path. The living boy lived. He did not leave his bed for 2 weeks. He did what children who've had to do both sides of a house do, slept at the wrong hours, looked in the wrong direction when a woman sang, ate when a spoon told him to. He grew into the sort of child that troubles men who have perfected their virtue in front of glass and not in front of women. He grew into a man of 40 who could make his own lintel and salt it. He did not tie his children to a hole to teach them to be interesting, because he had learned to be interesting for 2. You want your hook. You want me to take you out of the Sutterfield kitchen and into your own with a smell that does not belong to your time, and tell you that you have been teased, and I am going to perform for you the last trick. Here it is, sometime around the 23rd day after the burial, which is a time when grief gets dull enough that your hands think they are doing ordinary work and your body tries to cut its own throat by being comforted by ordinary work. The spoon did not tap. The drawer did not move. The child slept when he should and cried when he should and took milk when he had milk and cried when he did not, and Mary did the thing we ask mothers to do when the men have run the rope between the trees until it has learned to hate them. She slept. She slept a deep, insulting sleep for 5 hours. In that sleep, because God can be as vulgar as the rest of us, she dreamed of 2 hands on dirt. In the morning, without talking about it to anyone because she had learned that talking makes people tell you their theories, she went to the sill and put a heel of bread on it, not because the spoon had said, and not because the doctor had written a schedule. She put it there like a woman puts a seed in the soil a week later than a man's almanac tells her to and sees if soil is generous. She put it there like a theft, and then she put a little salt across the threshold like a debt paid after a long season of not writing down what you have bought. The spoon did not move. The barometer did not drop. The child did none of the work of a rope. She went to the cedar drawer. She put her hand on it like a lid. She said, "Al, right then," as if she were done combing a daughter's hair and sending her out with a sprig of something she thought could stop a man. She took the penny and put it in a jar. She put the jar on the shelf. The drawer slept so well that the wood changed the way it looked. If you have ever had a piece of furniture you had to ask to stay, you will know what I mean. It lost the shine of performance. It became wood again. It took on lie and grace like a respectable instrument. What you imagine happened then, what your city has taught you to want, you will not get. There was no visitation, no carnival of doctrine. No man from Lexington took notes and framed them and hung them next to his case of instruments so his patients would pay him for his poetry. The inquest concluded. The docket was buried in a crate. A clerk who grew up to be me pulled it out 30 years later and did what a clerk does, made it into a story, an account, and a way to understand his own kitchen. I am not sorry if you need your last hook, because stories work like rope in that they must be coiled properly to put them away. Take this to your bed and see if it does not tap your table twice in 1878, after I had been married long enough to know the smell of a woman's work and had learned to gauge the health of a house by whether its bread went green or white in October. My wife put a heel on the sill not because I told her to, but because she had read a recipe for Region Beyond, and women read recipes as if they were memoranda. The spoon, which we had not hung because my wife did not like the clatter, and we were not in the habit of doing any of it anymore, had been put back on the nail, and I, romantic fool, clerkly idiot, had frowned at her for this superstition she had decided to inherit without my permission. It tapped the spoon twice, then once. We had no babies to explain that year. We had a drought. We had a well whose rope had been taken out and laid under a board plank like a sleeping dog. I set salt under the threshold, not because my wife had put the heel on the sill. The bread was stale, I did not like it, but because I had learned how to count when anything asked me to. The house slept without being asked. The river was still hateful. The county still died in August. My wife still had to bring in the laundry quick when the wind took a turn in the afternoon. And the spoon still tapped, good as any instrument with a name that earns a salary. If you expect me to explain, you have not learned from me, nor from the Sutterfield kitchen, nor from the doctor of Transylvania, who learned to practice humility with a barometer under his arm like a fool's flower. I cannot tell you if the twins in 1834 were bound by nerves, or thin places, or our parlor word for rope. I can tell you that science did not suffer. It learned its time. It learned to be counted with instead of in front of. It learned to write down that he had observed a phenomenon and that it had not made a fool of him to say that it had not fit in the book. It learned to stop teasing holes. It learned to set a heel when the house wanted and to keep a spoon handy and to be less grand about whatever came down from Cincinnati in a carpet bag. If this sounds like scorn, forgive me. I have too many men in my family who invented names to make their wives stop talking. I think a spoon may be a better instrument than most of us. The county did not say curse in that year. We never have. It is a word we bring out when we want to be mean to places we have left. We said agreement. We said do not be a fool about the mirror. We said do not tie a child to a hole, tie his shoe. We said if you have to pull at a thing, do it politely. We said hold your own breath for once and see how you like it. We said if you have to write it down, do it like a book of reigns, not like a book of laws, we said. And I say it now to end in the correct key for people who expect their clerk to give them something they can take down the lane and repeat if they are asked and not be called fools. Count properly. There were 2 knocks the day of the burial. There was one on the 7th day. There were days without taps. There were taps after I married because my wife was smarter than me and did not say so. And because my spoon learned where its nail was. There were taps that were not taps, the sound things make when humidity tries to teach wood to sing. There were men who used rope correctly shifted to the work of fences and cows and not to holes. There were doctors who brought their indignity to my table and learned to set it under a breadboard. There were children who learned to be less interesting, and we loved them for it, and they died less. Science, when it does not know how to celebrate, tries to write new words. I will give science one set of words it can have from the cupboard of my kitchen if it promises not to take anything else. Method of repair. Not explanation, not theory, not even case, just repair. We call it putting a heel on the sill in October.
We call it salt.
We call it peace. We call it Hannah put her hand on the drawer. We call it 2, then 1. We call it leave the mirror covered. We call it, if you must send for a man, make it one with a barometer who loves his wife better than he loves his numbers. You want the moral. You will not get it. We are not moral up here. We are punctual. I will give you the trick, because all you city folk want is a trick you can write on a slate and show to your children and pretend that it belongs to your own genius. If something knocks twice and then once in your kitchen and you have not hung a spoon on a nail, you may still have a prayer. Put a heel on the sill. Salt the threshold as if you were an old woman. Put your hand on whatever in that room is made of wood and would rather be furniture than artifact. Say, all right then. Do not say names. Do not bring a battery. Do not bring rope. Do not call it curse. Do not call it miracle. Call it bargain. Call it Kentucky. Count. And if in the counting you find yourself saying it out loud and your wife hears you and she looks at you like you are a fool, marry her again in your heart for all the time she did it without you. On the last day of August in the year that made me 25, I went to the Sutterfield Oak with my docket and my good pencil and put down longhand for the sake of my future this. I sat under the oak. I thought the dirt respectfully. I put my hand on the drawer because it is decent to treat wood as if it were a hand. I put a heel on the sill because I have found that I like the smell of stale bread in a room that has learned to breathe. I salted the threshold because my mother would have whipped me if I did not, and my wife would have kissed me, and both those disciplines are better than a battery. The spoon tapped twice. It tapped once, no one died. I am making a habit of this. You will say, that is not a mystery science cannot explain. That is a ritual that keeps men from teasing the creek. I will tell you we have done very well with less. You will say, "It is macabre to put a heel where you eat." I will tell you the macabre thing is the hole you tried to put a rope into because you wanted to tell people a story at the tavern. You will say, "But there were twins." I will say, "There was a mother." You will say, "But the spoon tapped." I will say, "Count properly." There was a coda in the docket that I will give you not for fascination, not for cruelty, not because my family loves to stand by holes, but because you deserve to be told what happened when the Lexington man with the battery came back, as he did, with a smaller coil and a better letter. He put it on my table because I had told him to come to my house if he came at all. He asked if my wife was home. She was not. He said, "Good," because he thought himself a gentleman. "Sir," I said, "you will have your electrometer if I have my spoon." He said he did not love me. I said, "That is correct." He touched the battery to the spoon, because men do not learn. The spoon tapped, as spoons do when the air asks them to, twice, and then once, and his little coil made a jumping like a frog goes under a person's foot in creek. He gasped because he thought it a revelation. I told him my wife would be home. He left. I sat with my docket then, proud as any citizen who has outlived a man with a carpetbag, and I wrote down the smallest scream a man is allowed to make in public. I am content to count. I am handing you that sentence because you will need it whether your county has caves or not. If you live in a city where the water is kept under lid and your board scratches names on plaques with its pink knife, pay anyway, heel, salt hand. If you live in a place where men do not believe they have a kitchen because their wives have been too clever at making a meal look like a tablecloth, pay anyway. If you are sick of being told that your grief is a superstition and you are too proud to cry the correct number of times, pay, count, eat, salt, sleep. Cover the glass. Say, "All right then," in your sleep when the spoon taps. When you go to tell this at a table later, because we must all surprise someone at dinner lest we be accused of not having lived, and someone says, "That's not macabre, that's capacious," you will have this last bit to insist on your little thrill. 30 years after the twins, when Harlan Living had made a life of putting thresholds together for people who were too proud to tell him how to do it, and had put 3 babies in the ground, and had married twice, and had never once tied a name to a hole. He died in late August in a bed he had made respectable by sleeping in it years. Before he died, he made the sound a creek makes when it finally gets to see the light and lay down in it. The spoon tapped twice, then once. His daughter, who had learned that sometimes the creek and the spoon have the same throat, put a heel on her sill that night and salted her threshold and put her hand on the cedar drawer she had inherited, because her mother had left it to her like a secret and alone. She dreamed of 2 hands on dirt. She woke up and said to her daughter, "All right then." She turned the shoes. She covered the glass. She salted the step. Her husband, who was a decent man and a fool, wanted to tie a string to a hole. She cut it with her scissors and told him to tie his shoes. He did. He wept. He went to church. He lied to the minister. He went home. He put a heel on the sill next October and did not tell anyone. His mouth learned to count out loud in his sleep. His daughter learned to cover the glass. You will want the spoon to tap now as you fold this page and go to wash for your own supper. I can recommend no conjuration. I can recommend a practice.
Hang one.
A spoon. Not because you think the world will oblige your desire to be entertained, but because you are capable of being punctual. Nail it where your wife does not have to hear it when women should not have to hear anything. Keep a heel about your kitchen when the year is turning. Salt. Turn the shoes. Cover the glass. If it ever taps, do not speak names. If it never taps, you have still learned to be less foolish than a man with a coil and more useful than a man with a rope. You will have learned to count. 2, then 1. And you will have learned perhaps not to need a science when you have a kitchen. That is a mystery no man can explain, and no one ought to be ashamed of being unable. We lived past it, which is the county's quiet miracle. We did not stay pinned to a day in 1834 as flies do to a square of pine in the window. We walked through August into September, through cholera into frost. We learned to let the oak keep what it had been asked to keep without parading grief like a rooster. Inquests went on being taken, for drowned men, for men who died under wagons, for babies who could not keep the summer. But the docket labeled Inquestinto Oni Kyle de Ic Repertola D went into the crate with the confidence of a thing that has done its correct work and can sleep. It slept for 30 years until I pulled it out and woke it to ask it questions. It did not scold me. It showed me its spoon. That was not the end of our counting. It became the beginning of our method. I have a ledger. You will say, of course you do. You are a clerk, and therefore you believe paper can replace courage. Laugh. The ledger outlives my laugh. It smells of lye and of tobacco spit and of a kind of grief that the county prefers. Not to sanitize, God preserve us from sanitation as liturgy, but to put in the service of bread. It contains in one hand my docket, and in another my wife's kitchen, and in mine again the fussness of reporting to myself what men usually keep off paper for fear of being quoted. It is a book of reins and a book of spoons, and a book of the days when rope is permitted and when it is not. It has taught me to cross out, explain, and write, repair. In 1849, the cholera came again, the way a debt collector returns after a man has bought a new suit. It did not dress better for its repeat. We knew its hands this time. It died fewer of us. Men learned to boil, and to walk with their mouths closed at funerals, and to keep their drinking away from the creek when the river began to take its ugly breath. The spoon learned our names again, not to say them, not to call them down into holes, but to tap for them when the time came to set bread and to salt. In that year a child died in the next lane. No twins this time, only a single boy with the head of his father and the mouth of his mother. On the same day a calf was born with two clean little knees and stood up on its own without instruction. A man from Lexington would have insisted on writing a poem of that coincidence. Hannah insisted on bringing the woman a cup of lard for her hands, which had washed two bodies in one day. The spoon tapped twice, then once. The woman covered her glass because she had a habit of being saved. In 1862, when men were busy dyeing the river grotesque colors in the name of honor, when farm boys came home with rope burns on the wrong parts of their hands because they had been asked to pull anger instead of fence, when the caves were called upon to keep secrets not of God's making, we salted more. We learned to eat our bread slower. We learned that when you do not have a minister who does not know your kitchen, you will have to be a minister to yourself. I wrote an entry that year that someone might want to set in a glass case if they ever build a room where nothing works but memory. March 9. Spoon tapped 2 times at the minute a telegram touched my neighbor's hand. I did not put salt under his threshold, his wife did. I put it under mine. I set a heel on my sill not because it asked but because I was ashamed to be the sort of man who needs asking. I did not tie any rope to any hole because the country had tied enough rope to the wrong holes to shame us all. You will say that is politics. I will say it is kitchen. The only politics worth writing about is kitchen. You will object to my omission of another science. I should be ashamed not to include mesmerism, since the folk with the carpetbags and the words that make them feel clever came with animal magnetism on their tongues as comfortably as any prayer. They made a trip to the Sutterfield kitchen, less to help and more to hoard a story, and announced that the spoon was a medium and Mary was receptive. Hannah, who was hospitable even to foolishness when it meant someone would sit and take a turn, let them wave their hands and call it cure, then sent them on their way with a plate of cornbread so the county would not have to be ashamed of having sent them away hungry. When they were gone, the spoon tapped twice, then once. You can argue with anything you like. It only matters when you can argue with that. The mesmerist has never argued with anything as honest as a spoon. A man named Lattimore kept a tavern that changed its name every time he repented one too many fights. Told me in 1867 that his sister in Bourbon County had, or case. The word had been emptied of everything it was supposed to carry by men who make their wives' mornings sound like something that requires a degree. I went anyway. I am a fool for cases. Our girl birthed twins, he said, with the bluntness that does honor to the part of us that refuses to make bread story. One dead, one alive. Spoon. He did not say there were caves. He did not say the ground wanted to drain itself of courage. He said spoon. And he looked me in the eye like a man who has stayed married to a problem and has learned to do one trick with faith count. Bourbon's kitchen was not ours. Their oak is not our oak. Their creek goes the wrong way. The girl, Eliza, had a way of looking at the spoon like a cat looks at a thing that ought to move if her eyes command it. She had the good woman's trick of doing what the spoon asked without making a religion of it. She hung it because I told her to and because Hannah and Mary had made my mouth useful. It tapped twice, and 2 weeks later when a boy from Lexington, another coil, another letter, came into her kitchen with a device that made frogs make a noise under the right hand. The spoon did not please him. He touched his coil to the spoon. It tapped anyway. He touched his coil to the cedar drawer. It stuck. The coil popped in a way that sounded expensive. He said, "Explain," and I said, "Repair." He did not come again. Eliza lived to be a woman of 60 who knew exactly when to count and when to lay her hand on a drawer and say, "Hush." The year of the Cincinnati flood, 1884. Water learned an even worse vocabulary. The men at the river had reasons for rope that had nothing to do with caves. We tied it to rafters and to men's waists and to hogsheds and to the fact that a bridge is not a promise. The spoon tapped twice the night the water left my kitchen and found my neighbors, and I wrote in the ledger as if a judge were carefully going to weigh every black mark I made. Do not become so proud of repairing that you forget to prevent. Move your bread high. Put your salt in a jar with a lid. Count with your mouth closed, because what you need is to hear other people. No rope. If you call this superstition, at least pronounce it with tenderness, the way you whisper a child's stupid name when you love him anyway, because you are not better than a spoon. A man from Louisville with a hat that pretended to be a roof tried to put the word haunted into our kitchens in 1891. It was not that he wanted to embarrass us, he wanted to sell books. He is not the first to put want and sell in the same sentence and to make the county pay. He came into my ledger with the effect of a stick hitting a wasp nest on purpose. He told it like this: a macabre mystery of 1834, twins, one dead and one alive, spoon tapping, grave movement, caves groaning, science unhorsed. He offered his readers the word macabre because the people who buy books like to prove to themselves that their kitchen is more enlightened than a story, and because they want to believe they will country when they are needed, but not now while there is pastry. I drew a line through his name and wrote, for the benefit of any clerk who would come after me and be tempted to cite him, not kitchen. If you want macabre, you must visit a place where men tie names to holes. We will serve you nothing but bread. In 1898, after the war, you are obliged to pretend meant something teaches you to prefer the parts that did. My grandson, yes, I lived long enough to earn a grandson's impatient politeness, came into the kitchen with ink on his fingers and a map of the state like a rash in his pocket. He had been to Lexington and learned that men there talk about nerves with the same reverence his grandmother kept for recipes. He said, with the benevolence of a person under 30 who has learned that an explanation can be made while eating, "Granddaddy, there are twins who share organs." He looked proud, like a cat when it brings a squirrel. We do not share a creek. They share organs. He told me about a pair in France. He told me about a boy in Bavaria who dreamed a toothache when his brother ate a bad pear. Always the Germans in our stories because they put their strangeness in books. He smiled at our spoon. He was gentle. He was wrong. You can have two explanations, I said, the way you can have two biscuits. Eat both if you can keep them in you. There is that science, and I do not begrudge France and Bavaria their useful fingers. They can sew men back together with those now, and I am not the fool who supposes that a spoon can sew. But there is also this kitchen. If you do this, and I hung the spoon again for him, because his grandmother had taken it down to wash the wall and forgotten to put it back, and this. And I put a heel on the sill because my wife had started to call stale bread by its Sunday name, and this. And I made the line of salt across the threshold so fine I could have passed it off as dust, and this. And I put my hand on the cedar drawer. And you count. Then that boy can be in Bavaria and feeling pears in his teeth and also be in my kitchen not needing rope. And if both are true, that does not make Kentucky smaller. I am old now. If this page feels like a sermon, forgive me. Age awards everybody an unearned pulpit. I am not going to use the last inches on this paper to put a respectable bow on a story about August in 1834 and a family who parted dirt and did not let it part them. I am going to write down the rules. In case your own kitchen is shy and your spoon is stubborn, and you have married someone who insists a nail belong in the wall when it can do a job. Rule the first. Cover your glass when somebody dies. I do not care who says that is savage. The glass does not need your face now. It needs to see the sheet. You will scratch your memory with your own nails if you do not practice shame properly. Rule the second. Hang a spoon. Choose the wall that does not offend your wife. Make sure the nail is honest. Put it where you would not be annoyed if it spoke when you were sleeping. You are less brave than the men who came to your town with coils. Do not pretend otherwise. Give your instrument a language it can handle. Rule the third. Bread on sill in October. Set a heel you would otherwise call pig food on your sill. Put it on a plate if the old women in your bones insist on courtesy. The bread is not your god. It is your calendar. If you feel yourself becoming sentimental, eat the heel when the spoon does not tap and congratulate yourself on having learned to turn a superstition into a meal. Rule the fourth. Salt the threshold when your bones tell you. A pinch, not the budget. Do not strut. The salt is the small discipline that turns shame into fairness. It is not a line against devils. It is an admission that doors are the most important thing you own. Rule the fifth. Rope for fence and hay and for pulling a man out of a river if he is within reach. No rope for holes. No rope for caves. No rope for wells under plaques. No rope for grief that wants entertainment. You will excuse my excitement on this subject. You have never watched a county tangle itself with its own righteousness. I have. Rule the sixth. Do not say names to holes. Names belong in tales and ledgers and to wives and children, and to sickness that looks you in the face and asks to be called at last. If you cannot bear not to speak, speak the word peace, not because it is magic, but because it is shorter than other prayers you do not have time for. It will put your mouth in the right shape. Rule the seventh. Count. 2. Pause. 1. I do not know what that means to the creek. I only know it means I am who I am when I am asked. If you are asked and you pretend not to be home, the county will learn it and ask fewer questions, and you will be embarrassed later for having taught your place to stop speaking to you. Rule the eighth. Write it down. I am a clerk. You do not need to be, but if the spoon ever taps for you and you do not write it down, you will be an old liar at your own table, and we have too many of those already. Do not put it in the paper. Put it in your kitchen. Put it where your children can find it and think their own thoughts and add the sentences they will need that your science, which will be better than mine in one way and clumsier in another, cannot. They will say, I have made a mystery mundane. No, I have made it possible. A macabre mystery science cannot explain. Twins, one dead, one live, spoons, pennies, graves that hold their shape, caves that keep their radical silence, rope that refuses to do theatrical work. In this county does not ask for altars. It asks for technique. I have made a technique. The scoffer will say, your spoon tapped because a fly hit it. Let the scoffer come in August and tell me what is a fly and what is a tap, and I will teach him to write a docket with love instead of vanity. Men from Cincinnati will write cartoons of us and focus on the drawer and the penny because they prefer to believe country women do not know their own minds. Men from Lexington will write letters in italics and ask why their coils did not behave as spoons. Men from Germany will write in law letters about mirror twins and teach your grandchildren how to sew a man back together. All of them are doing good work. Their good work sits on my sill and eats my heel when it is appropriately hungry. But when the spoon taps twice and then once, in the absence of noble words, in the presence of dishes, you will have a choice. You can decide you have read enough of me and go to bed, or you can get up and put a heel on the sill and salt your threshold and cover your glass and put your hand on a drawer that has learned to be furniture and say, all right then. The creek will do what it does. The hole will do what it does. Your house will learn your voice. That is the macabre cure science cannot explain because it does not cure the mystery. It cures the part of you that thought explanation belonged in the kitchen. I am going to die soon. If I am blessed, I will do it in August, when my county knows how to blacken and forgive in the same breath. It will refuse to oblige me with a spectacle because I have taught it to be a house. And perhaps, God's mercy and my wife's good humor, I will have taught myself to be a soul. My grandson will cover the glass because his grandmother will insist, And because he has learned that men are blessed when women insist, he will set a heel on the sill and salt the threshold and hang the spoon in case it has fallen. It will tap twice. Then once. He will say, "All right then," to no one in particular, because a county can be a church without insulting itself, and he will put his hand on the drawer and feel nothing but wood. He will feel that as grace. He will write in the ledger under my untidy hand, "Paid," because he will have learned, "Be amused with me one last time." It is the only moral I can stand to write, that on the days when the whole soaks beneath its plaque, and the oak keeps its dead, and August tries to murder us like a jealous lover, the only reason to be here is to pay. If you must end with a hook, because you have learned from cities to be a reader before you learn to be a husband, take it in the language you have asked me to teach you for 3 pages and a part you pretended not to need. The spoon taps twice. A cigarette you should not have smoked goes out. The baby turns in his sleep. Your dog lifts his head. The pause. You hear your own cowardice say, "Rope." The one tap. So you count. You put your hand where drawers keep their souls. You say, "All right then." The county goes on being a sieve. Kentucky is repaired for a night again. Science does not have to leave its chair. It has been invited to sit with us if it brings its patience. Bread is eaten in the morning because nothing should go to waste. Salt is swept up in 3 days when the damp is done with it. The glass uncovers itself when the house is done being shy. The oak holds. The whole keeps its silence. We sleep. 2-1.